Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the React tutorial. In this one, we're going to completely forget about the functional components that we talked about in the last tutorial, and then take a deep dive into the class components because that is really the core of React, and we can do a lot of things with class components that um, functional components can't. So this is a code that we will be achieving at the end. We can just delete the function, but so ignore this function name. But we are actually just rendering. Oh wait, give me a second. So the cool thing about what we're making today is that we're not actually passing a property anymore, first of all, and then we're calling the tick inside of the clock class. And we're also doing something called a this.state. And so don't worry if none of these make sense to you right now, but this code right here improves a lot about the readability and stuff like that. So actually we can delete that. Oh, we need to call it once. So tick. Yep. So yeah, we just need to call it once tick, call this function, and then we can go to clock class and then it is going to continuously call tick that belongs to the clock class multiple times. So now let's learn how to get there. So I'm going to control Z all the way back to the code of our previous tutorial. Don't know where's that. Don't know how far it got. I think somewhere around here, I believe. Oh, also, we've been talking about life cycle methods that we talked a lot about last time. So this is what we had last time. In this one, I think I can just completely delete the clock function one because I don't really need that. And let me see. Yep. And right now, let's keep the past date. But okay. So last time I didn't talk about this, but usually when you use class, you always want to do this thing right here that I'm about to show you. Always want to call the constructor and then make props one of the things, and then just do super props. You just, according to React docs, just do that. Yeah, even though it sometimes works even without doing this. And then we don't want to pass in a property anymore. And here's the reason why. Properties are generally used for passing data between components that, let's say, the class A doesn't have. The class A has this data that we need to use in class B, so we have to pass from class A to class B. Now, date is accessible in JavaScript anywhere. So do we really want to, pass it in as an argument? I find that completely not useless, but kind of necessary. So let's delete that. So now when we run this, it should not work because I don't think we know what is this.props.passDate anymore. So that's okay. Let's instead make this.state equals to uh, date. Actually, just do past date so we can kind of understand this, and then new date. And then to refer to the state, don't worry, I'll talk about this in a second. To refer to the state, we can just do this.state.passDate, which will refer to, which will go to state and then go to that element right there. Okay, so we do see it worked for a second, and it's not rendering right because we didn't call tick. I mean, we call it tick, but stuff is not working at the moment, and I'll get to why in a second. Now, first of all, before when we passed in the tick equals new tick, I mean, when we pass in the properties here, the property itself is updating every single 1000 second, and then it's passed this class right here, and then it's rendered there. So that therefore it is updating. But in this one, it's not updated because we're just instantiating state one time, that one time, and then we're not continuously updating it. Now, so how do we get it to continuously update? Well, first of all, let's talk about state. States are belongs to classes, and usually you want to have the state to store something that you want to later display in your render function, right? So, I mean, it's a JavaScript. I mean, it's kind of class is kind of like any object, so you can have functions in it. this function might set the state because I'm doing some complex logic, and then you want that logic to you want that logic to kind of transform something, some variable that you will later render, right? So in this case, you would generally put that into the state so that you can just call it later in render. This kind of like a global storage thing in the class. Um, Let me see. So we want to make this tick. I think we want to make this tick. Now to make a tick, we want to use something called a life cycle method, and this is a life cycle method. I think I talked about this briefly, but there are like four. There are like actually 10 to 20 of them. There's component did mount. I know component will mount. Component did amount, I think. Component will amount, component receive props. All of these kind of, React, when you make a class, it is constantly, actually, when you make a functional component and class, React is constantly watching for these life cycle methods to happen. And even though functional components cannot use component amount, the React developing team, I believe they said that they still haven't upgraded functional components to kind of get rid of the memory allocation that these lifecycle methods has to bring. So yeah, that's why functional components will be a lot quicker in the future. Is because they're not watching for these cycle methods anymore because they can't use it. Sorry if that's a little bit confusing, but the general point is that these lifecycle method is going to happen when something macro kind of happens, right? So I'll just show you guys the example. So component did mount is a function that React watches, that React calls after it finishes its initial render. So the thing is that so here's the order. React sees this, right? After it sees this, we're trying to render the clock class. So it goes into the clock class, calls its constructor, sets the state for the first time, and then it calls render. Then in render, we render this, right? So that's the local time, whatever. And then we call component did mount. Okay, so in component did mount, this is what we want to do. Set interval, this dot tick 1000. And then inside of this dot tick, we're going to do this. I mean, tick. We're going to make a tick function, which is this. What we're calling this. What we're calling here. This is going to do this dot set state. Don't worry if you don't get it now. I'm going to explain in a second. Past date, new date. And if we run it now, I believe it should work. And I'll go over why it works. 27, nice. And let's clear out a few things. Let me just clear out a few things. So here's an interesting thing. You can just call it tick start. Let's just call it start. Let's just call it start. Okay. Or we can just do this is okay. So let's go over this thing. We call start, right? JavaScript. And start basically renders this thing right here in clock class. So then all of this thing that is updating all belongs to the clock class. So you might wonder how it works. And I'm gonna trace it to make it make sense to you. First of all, again, I'm gonna keep repeating these until it kind of ingrains your brain because this will be some common design patterns that you will use in your future if you pursue React. Whenever you go into a class component, when it's initialized, you're going to call it the constructor. The constructor will initialize any state if there is, and in our case we have a state property called past state, and we're going to initialize it to the current time, so 541 whatever. Then it is going to call render for the first time. So the render for the first time is that right there, 54 right there. For that 1 second, that is the first render. And then React watches for if there is a component did mount. So that it will call component did mount after the initial render. So now it's going to call component did mount. And we can see right here, set interval. This dot tick every 1000 seconds. So in other words, we're going to call a function called tick every 1000 seconds. And then tick is going to update our state. And we're going to update the state to a new date. So that updates every single second basically. So every 1 second, we're going to set state, new state. So then there's going to be, I think, two issues that you might have very, like, right now. First of all, like, maybe the syntax of this is weird, and then, like, what is this crap right here, right? You might not have seen this arrow function thing. And then at last, you might have the question of, like, we never called render again from here. So why is it rendering again? These are all questions that I also had, so don't be afraid if you had them. So here's the thing, right? Whenever you call set state and that your state does actually update, React is going to basically schedule an UI update. It is going to say, hey guys, we have something in this class that changed. And in render, we also use that property. We also use that property in render. So probably we want to update our UI, our user interface, our user output, so that it matches whatever we want in the state. So basically, calling set state schedules an UI update, and then it's going to call render again. And this does not only apply to set state, a lot of other functions. Basically, whenever something here that is JavaScript, so we might do like, I don't know, like this dot, you know, just some sort of JavaScript variable that we have, and if we test that somehow, that JavaScript variable updated, then we're going to call render again. So it's not only a set state. Yeah. So now let's answer the question of, wait, let me see, what are the 3 questions? So set state is that. And basically a set state is really intuitive. And then maybe you have the question of, what is this arrow thing? Now this ties all the way back to JavaScript. First of all, set interval is, you know, is accessible anywhere, so don't worry about that. It's just a common JavaScript function. But when you create functions, normally, they are not binded to a class by any chance. So if you were to call tick, let's try tick. Yeah, first of all, I was going to say tick not defined, but if we do like this dot tick, it's actually not going to work either. And the reason is because when you call this dot tick, it's actually not going there, because tick right here does not belong to this, which is clock class. So right here, when we call set interval this, we are referring to the clock class, but tick does not is not in the clock class. So it's not binded in the clock class. So then we can bind it. And one of the ways to bind it is to use an arrow function. And we just do this. Yeah. So now that works. And I think that's all I want to say. So if we do a brief review, in this one we kind of took a deep dive into class components. We went into lifecycle components, which are really important. And we went into set state, whatever arrow functions. But I want to go over the overlying reason of why we did this, and that is because all we removed is a property here. We had a prop here. It was called, I think, past date. And it is now logical to have it there because it has some property there that is actually accessible to any JavaScript code, right? It is accessing new dates. So if it's not specifically something that we want to pass from this code right here into this code, then we will probably want to initialize it in this code right here, and that's what we did. And also, you know, we made the tick happen here instead of here, right? Because or else, you know, it's gonna be we're gonna be calling this whole thing every 1000 milliseconds. So yeah, that's the underlying reason.